Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. In this video I'm going to give the old Packard Bell another try, the one from the previous video that I paired up with a 486. Now the idea is to turn this kind of office-like PC into a Windows 98 retro gaming rig because it has the AMD K62 CPU, which is a rather nice CPU for a retro build. Now, the current downside of the PC is that it's running Windows XP, so that's something that we're going to need to change. But every time before I start reinstalling software, I do want to take a little peek to see what's on the computer, just to see what kind of device drivers it has and what kind of software it has installed. But unfortunately, I didn't have the password for this user, so I was kind of locked out. Now, my hacking skills are fairly limited, and I couldn't get past this login prompt. Not even with the help of the password hint, which was provided to me, I didn't get into the account. Luckily, with Windows XP, you can hit Ctrl-Alt-Delete twice and you get the standard Windows XP login prompt. And when I tried to log in as the administrator without a password, I was able to enter the system without any issues. Now, it's not in my habit to poke around other people's stuff, but the only thing that I wanted to see here was to see what kind of hardware we had and how it was detected by Windows XP. I also wanted to get a little feel on the performance of the machine. And, things were running relatively smoothly. It's not a speed demon. I think Windows XP might be a tad overkill for this PC, but I did want to check out the device manager just to see what kind of hardware and drivers were installed on this machine. So as a display adapter, we have the SIS530-620. We have an ESS PCI audio drive, which is a fairly good card for MS-DOS compatibility. So looking forward to try that out. Other things are pretty standard. We have a CD-ROM drive. We have a networking adapter installed. We have a 10 gigabyte Seagate hard drive. And we also have a USB controller, so that will make copying software to the machine a lot easier. But this PC was designed for Windows 98, and together with this AMD K62 500 MHz and ESS audio chip, this should make for an interesting retro PC build. We do need to take into account that the integrated graphics isn't going to be a real speed demon. I mean, we do have some options because we have some PCI slots here, but I thought it would be interesting in this video just to see how well the integrated graphics would perform and just how far we can go in terms of playing retro games on this PC. Now, I could take it easy and just use a 3DFX card like this Voodoo 1 card or this Voodoo Rush card. Perhaps a Voodoo 2 might be better. Or my all-time favorite, the Voodoo Banshee. But that would be cheating a little bit. They're all PCI cards, so it would work just fine. But now I can imagine that most people, especially those who just started out in retro computing, don't have a lot of 3DFX cards at hand. And they're usually stuck with these mediocre PCI cards from S3 or Trident or Cirrus Logic. Now, the problem with PCI cards is not that there are no interesting cards. The fact is that they are becoming very rare and cost a lot of money. If I look at my stock, I mean, it's kind of abysmal to see the amount of interesting PCI cards that I have. I have a couple of Matrox cards, I have the Rendition card, I have a Diamond Stealth, but that's basically it. Now, AGP cards are plentiful. I mean, you can find lots of Riva cards, Voodoo 3 cards, ATI cards. But because these are AGP cards, it kind of rules out them being used in this PC because we only have 3 PCI slots. As we're already on the topic of hardware, let's take a look at the motherboard that came with this PC. So let me just take off the CPU cooler so that we can look at the actual CPU. And this is a Micro ATX motherboard. We have unmistakably the AMD K62 CPU, 500 megahertz from 1998. I think it was released in 1999. And this line of desktop PCs topped out at 550 megahertz. So we have a pretty speedy CPU here. The motherboard is manufactured by NEC, and there's not really that much special going on here. Now, the configuration of the CPU is done through jumpers, so we can set the host clock, we can set separate memory clocks. CPU ratio is set to 5 because we have a 100 megahertz front side bus, so giving us 500 megahertz. We have the core voltage of the CPU here, which is 2.2 volts. We have the AMI BIOS here on this motherboard. And just a quick look, there's really not a whole lot to see, and there's very little stuff that you can configure using this AMI BIOS here. You can set up the boot options. There is a power management setup, all pretty standard stuff. Plug and play. The peripherals, so we can enable, disable serial ports, parallel ports, IDE, sound card, and we can also configure the onboard video card, so setting the memory size, the aperture, the PCI palette snoop. We have two RAM sticks installed. We have one 64 megabyte and one 256 megabyte stick. We have a bunch of connectors here, standard stuff like keyboard, mouse. We have two USB ports. We have a parallel port, serial port, onboard VGA, and then the sound stuff with the game connector and the audio jacks. So that's pretty much it. I mean, fortunately, there's no additional AGP port that we can use for video, so we're stuck with those three PCI slots. At the heart of this motherboard is the SIS530 chipset. A chipset that you often find in these low-cost, cheap, office-like computer platforms, often paired with non-Intel CPUs such as AMD or Cyrix. It also includes an integrated graphics controller supporting Direct3D and OpenGL, but it has abysmal 3D performance. And here we see it paired with the SIS5595 South Bridge. For sound, we have the ESS Solo 1, the ES1938S sound chip, and this chip should be really good for MS-DOS based compatibility. But first things first, and let's install Windows 98. I have a Packard Bell Recovery Master CD here that I'm gonna slip in. Just listen to the CD-ROM drive or turbine engine starting up. Now, I can't say that I missed that type of sound, but once booted, we get into this menu here where we can restore the system, but at first, this didn't work at all. I was confronted with errors, and I think this was due to the fact that the partition layout of the disk contained an NTFS partition from the Windows XP, so I had to remove that. So after deleting the partition, I got into the Master CD Restore system where I had the option to reinstall Windows or restore the entire system. So to get the full Packard Bell experience, I decided to do a full restore. This would obviously erase all data on the hard drive, which wasn't really an issue. So this was just a matter of hitting next and letting this process roll out. Now this is a very easy and convenient way to do a full system restore, as it does require very little or no manual intervention. The thing will basically install Windows 98 and drivers and settings completely automatically. You don't need to deal with system prompts, you don't need to hit next. I mean, how many times have you installed Windows 98, left your desk only to come back that you missed that one next button click before it started completely installing the thing? And as it's going about its business, you will see that the screen is kind of flickering a bit, and that's an actual problem that I will get to later. But here you can also see that Packard Bell installs quite a lot of additional software on the system. I mean, one of the reasons for using such a master restore CD is to have everything installed factory default, and I don't think that this PC arrived at the customer's desk with this color palette. So yeah, probably part laziness, part stupidity on my part for picking the wrong master recovery CD, but we have Windows 98 installed. It does have some Packard Bell software and look and feel to it, so that's already good. But now we need to install the display drivers. Now installing the graphic drivers requires us to copy over the driver to the system. Luckily, of course, I have a USB connector on the PC, so I inserted my USB thumb drive, only to discover that the storage media driver failed to install. So I know that in Windows 98 and Windows 98 Second Edition, you need to install these kind of I don't know if they're third party, but you definitely need to install USB drivers. It's not sufficient that you have the USB root device in your device manager. It still needs to be able to find USB storage devices. And I tried a couple of different thumb drives, and out of the box it just wouldn't work. It didn't detect the thumb drives at all. In device manager you saw the USB disk here with a big yellow exclamation mark or question mark. So I copied over the USB drivers for Windows 98 First Edition, so that's really important. You need the First Edition drivers. So I used a 3.5-inch floppy disk to copy over the drivers to the Windows 98 hard drive. So once these were installed, I was able to load up my USB thumb drive, luckily. So here you can see me finding the USB thumb drive, and we get the removable disk entry here in our Windows Explorer. So in the games department, I wanted to try some games that were primarily targeted for MS-DOS, but also could be run under Windows. But here I'm running them in MS-DOS, so I didn't start Windows, I just launched into the command prompt immediately. And I had no issues whatsoever in running these games and getting the sound detected, so that was a really nice experience. So the sound card is normally recognized as a Sound Blaster clone. You just set up the I/O ports, the IRQs and the DMAs, and you're up and running. So you'll have no issues running games like Doom, for example. You just set up the sound card and you are good to go. The game obviously runs very well because the AMD CPU is a little bit overkill for it. Same goes for Duke Nukem 3D. Just set up the sound card and you're off to the races. So that's really good. And again, of course, the game runs absolutely fine. And I also wanted to try this old favorite of mine, which is Microprose Formula 1 Grand Prix 2, a game that I played a lot when I was a kid. So it's really nice to see this on this computer running at full frame rate. But now back to the sound chip. The ESS Solo 1 is actually a joy to work with in MS-DOS environments. When you start up the PC, you'll notice that it will load up some drivers in MS-DOS and it will configure it as a Sound Blaster Pro compatible sound card. So that means that all of your MS-DOS games can be configured very easily with Sound Blaster compatibility. I mean, the only thing you need to do is set up some IRQs, some DMAs, and you are good to go. I didn't have any issues with any of the games that I've tried, and sound support in MS-DOS was really excellent. Same here with Microprose Formula 1 Grand Prix 2. Has a different kind of sound setup, but just configure the IRQ, the port, the DMAs, and you're good to go. But let's turn things up a notch and let's run Quake. Now, Quake is one of those 3D games that runs pretty well in low resolution, providing you have a beefy PC, which I have. And as you can see, Quake is running just fine, but as we up the video resolution to 600 by 480, you definitely see that the system is starting to lag a little bit. I mean, it is still playable, but you're not gonna be winning a whole lot of death matches here using this resolution. I mean, you do need to have a more powerful 3D capable card in order to run this game at these resolutions. And this is something that becomes very obvious when you're running 3D benchmarking software like 3D Mark 99, for example. I mean, on the 800 by 600 resolution, you can see it already drops a lot of textures, so that's definitely not good. And even with the lower resolution, the 3D performance was still abysmal. I mean, this looks more like a PowerPoint presentation slideshow than an actual demo of a game. I mean, I realize that this PC was probably originally meant for office work, but come on, give me a break. But we're not gonna let these synthetic 3D benchmarks ruin the fun, because there are quite a lot of games that do actually run pretty well on this machine. Okay, it's not the same quality as you would get with a 3DFX card, but I mean, I remember back in the day playing Carmageddon before I had a Voodoo card, and it worked. And this is the case right here, so... But it is true, as we move closer to the millennium and we start to play these more 3D intensive games and the games that really require direct 3D APIs, I mean, you're going to see a lot of shortcomings with this integrated graphics processor. For example, here Carmageddon 2 is really not playable at all using direct 3D and the SIS integrated chipset. But again, that doesn't mean that you can't have a lot of fun with this PC. For example, take Need for Speed 2 Second Edition here. Okay, it's not the same quality again as a 3DFX card, but you can run this game full option and it runs pretty well. But now step a year into the future and we have Need for Speed 3, which is a totally different ball game. I mean, even at the lowest resolution, you can see that the PC is kind of struggling a bit to render everything. I mean, not only is the image quality really bad, but also the gameplay. And again, bump up the resolution and you get more of a slideshow instead of a game. But other games like Forsaken here run actually pretty well, providing you know how to play it, because these controls keep driving me crazy. Now, did we fail miserably in trying to change this office PC into a retro gaming rig? Well, definitely not. I mean, I had a lot of fun revisiting these old games, and even with the integrated graphics, I mean, a lot of these games, especially the older ones, obviously, played really well on this computer. And it's not only Windows-based games that ran really well, it's in particular also the MS-DOS games that were a joy to work with. I mean, sound setup was really easy. There were MS-DOS drivers for the integrated sound cards, and everything was running just fine. I even had fun playing Quake on this computer, and even at higher resolutions it was a bit laggy, but it was playable. It was also nice to see that games like Need for Speed 2 ran well, and obviously games that aren't that 3D intensive, such as real-time strategy games, can also be run just fine. It is a bit of a shame that we cannot explore AGP options, and my current choice of PCI cards is a bit limited to the 3DFX family. But that doesn't mean that you don't have any worthy PCI options for a retro rig like this. You have the Riva TNT based chipsets, the Savage Pro, or the ATI 128 Pro. But until I can get my hands on one of those cards, I'm just gonna have to do with the integrated graphics in this one. I'll probably do a follow-up video on this one because I do want to see how the 3DFX cards will perform in a system like this. And hopefully in the meantime I will get a new arsenal of PCI cards. You never know. So I really hope you've enjoyed this video. Please stick around to look at the other stuff that I have on the channel. If you like this video, consider giving it a thumbs up, consider subscribing to the channel, please leave a comment, and I hope to see you guys soon. Bye bye.